Well, this morning, we're going to take a pause and step out of Elijah's story for just a moment. And we're going to talk about something that is really near and dear to the heart of Saddleback Church, that is really near and dear to the heart of CIY, this organization that we partner with every year to run summer camp. It's one of the things I love about partnering with them is that so often we find out that really we have so much in common, so many of the same things that we're chasing after, that we just seem to love together. But then also something that's near and dear to the heart of Jesus. The Bible talks quite a bit about this idea that you and I, those of us who call ourselves followers of Jesus, that we are to love on those who are less fortunate, that we're to take care of those who can't take care of themselves, that you and I who have in abundance are to take care of those who may not have anything or have very little. Specifically, there's a couple groups of people that are talked about repeatedly in Scripture, and it's widows and orphans. And this morning, we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of orphans and the foster care system. And while this doesn't really have much to do with Elijah's story, what this does have in common for not only Elijah, but for many of us, is that when we feel like we're running away from God, we feel like maybe God has abandoned us. That maybe when we've turned our back on God, that we can't seem to find him. And yet what we know to be true about God is that he says he will never leave us. He will never forget about us. That we are never too far gone from him. We can never really distance ourselves from him because his love is so great for us and so overwhelming for us that he is always pursuing us and chasing after us. And so this morning, here's what we're going to do. One of our very own Saddleback HSM students is going to talk to us about her story. So will you guys do me a very big favor and give a big warm welcome to Ella Edwards.
Hi, I'm Ella Edwards. I'm 16 years old, and I'm going to be a junior at Chibrico Hills High School. I would love to share my story with you of the journey I have been on since I was 3 years old. Even though I am only 16, I have been on a long journey to get where I am today. When I was 3.5, I lived with my birth mom in a little trailer in a friend's backyard. My birth father was never in the picture, so it was just me and her. My birth mom had me when she was 17, a senior in high school. She suffered from mental illness and was also battling an addiction to drugs. One day, she realized that she couldn't handle the responsibility of being my mom, and she ran away. She left me alone in the trailer at 3.5 without food or electricity for 2 days. Thankfully, a friend of my mom's came to check on me, and she found me and called the police. The police and a social worker took me in and began a search for my mom, but she was nowhere to be found. That is where my journey in the foster system began. My first foster placement was with my aunt and uncle. I don't remember much when living with them, but from what others tell me, they loved me very much, and they were very kind to me. At 4 years old, they had plans to adopt me, but after 9 months of living with them, my aunt was diagnosed with cancer. Her diagnosis was terminal, and her and my uncle could no longer care for me. She later passed away, so I was moved to my second foster placement in less than a year. I was moved to a home with a family and a few other foster kids. I lived with this home for almost all of kindergarten. From what I can remember, this was a tough home to be in, but they tried their best to treat me well. Again, in this home, there was a lot of talk of adopting me, but after some time had passed, another one of my aunt and uncles told the court that they wanted custody of me. So I was on to my next foster placement, and I was hoping it was going to be the last time I ever moved, and that this would be my forever family. If you are keeping track, this is home number 3. I relocated to Sacramento with my aunt and uncle at 5.5 years old. And honestly, there wasn't anything I wanted more than to have a mom, dad, and a family to call my own. I was really hoping to fit in and become a part of this family, but unfortunately things didn't get better, they got worse. And the last thing I felt in this home was a sense of family. I was treated differently from their own kids, my cousins. They made it known to me often that I was not one of them. I was made to feel unwanted and neglected. I felt so helpless and desperate to do anything to make them love me like they loved their own kids. But the longer I stayed there, the worse it got. I suffered mental, verbal, and physical abuse in this home. Things got so bad that I was afraid at times to fall asleep at night. I felt completely alone. Like I had no one to protect me, no one to love me, and no one looking out for me. After some more time had passed, my social worker found out about how I was being treated and immediately had me removed. Home number 4, which was actually back to home number 2, and the foster family I had previously lived with. I know, confusing, right? Imagine being 6 years old and in the middle of all of this. Let's just say life was pretty confusing. I really felt like there was no one. Even though I was moving back into a home I had already been in, it was completely different. It was a completely different environment. The dynamics of the family had changed because all of the other foster kids had left and it was just me and the foster parents. And something had changed with them. Maybe I was too young to notice before, but the mom was controlling and unkind. There were times when I felt miserable in this home and hated being there. I don't remember everything, but I do remember she would get so mad at me and her punishments were harsh. I spent a lot of time in the corner, was yelled at constantly, and I was always left feeling like I wasn't good enough. Thankfully, my social worker stepped in again and she noticed how miserable I was and how sad I felt, so I moved again, home number 5. I was 7 years old and still hopeful that I would find a mom and dad. I really wanted a family. Even though life had been difficult to this point, I was still hopeful. I moved in with a family in Laguna Niguel. They had a big, beautiful home and a huge bedroom full of stuff waiting for me. From day one, they told me that they wanted to adopt me. They already had a son of their own, and they really wanted to grow their family and add a daughter. For 3 months, they showered me with toys and stuff, helped me join a soccer team, and sent me to a fancy Catholic school. After 3 months, some things started to change. Now, I was 7 years old at the time, so I was hyper. I had been through a lot. I was a little crazy at times. When you hear what I had been through, you can understand why. But this family didn't understand why. Their son was quiet and reserved, and they wanted a daughter who was the same way. So it turned out that they wanted to adopt, but they had not wanted to adopt me. They told my social worker that I asked too many questions and I was too hyper. They said they wanted a more well-behaved child, one that wasn't so loud, a child more like their son. So even though they promised me they were going to adopt me, after 3 months in their home, they asked that I be moved to another family. The weirdest part was they never told me I was moving homes. One day they told me some new friends were going to come to meet me, and in walked in a new set of foster parents. This was the most confusing day of my journey so far, and this one hurt the most. To be so hopeful and think I found my family, only to find out they didn't want me anymore. Home number 6, the new friends, or the new foster parents that walked through the door, were Ron and Katie Edwards. I was 7 years old, and that day was July 1st. This day was kind of a blur. I was so sad and shocked that I was moving, and at the same time, I was trying to put on a brave face for these new parents. They took me to McDonald's for Happy Meals and to Target to pick out some new things for my bedroom. And then I went to live with them the very next day on July 2nd. I went from living in a huge house with lots of stuff to a tiny condo with lots of love. I was always hopeful that I would find a forever family and a mom and a dad and a sister who loved me. When I met the Edwards, they were exactly the family that I was hoping for and needed. They were loving and kind and gentle towards me and showed me what a family really is and needs to be. They treated me as their own from the very beginning. I thank God every single day that he led me to this family because he knew just what and who I needed. 14 months after I moved in, I was officially adopted and became an Edwards. My mom, Katie, always tells me I'm the best pregnancy she's ever had, and she knew from the very beginning that I was meant to be an Edwards. I am so glad I'm an Edwards. One of the things I didn't realize when I joined the Edwards household is their family is a lot bigger than the typical family. They introduced me to the church and that the church is an extension of family. So not only was I adopted by the Edwards, but I was adopted by a village of people who belong to the church. The Johnstons, the Pogues, the Farrs, the Halls, the Dellans, Megan, Matt, Bryce, Emma, and the JHM team. Not to mention a bunch of grandparents and crazy aunts and uncles. This extended family has rallied around me the last 9 years in the most amazing ways. They have loved me, shown up for me, taught me about Jesus, and shown me what a life with him looks like. I love my family, the one I live with, and the ones from my church. It's been 9 years since I left the foster system for good. Looking back at my story, I see a lot of ups and downs, a lot of tough moments, and I'm still processing through and dealing with some of the trauma of what I went through. Even though I am in a loving family, there are still days that the hurts and the pains show up again, but I am no longer alone. I have people who stand by me in those tough moments, and that is the difference between then and now. I used to be totally alone, and now I know I'm not. And I know I wouldn't be where I am without some of the people who looked out for me along the way. I want to give a shout out to my social worker, Julie. She journeyed with me and fought to move me and get me into a safe and loving home. I will forever be grateful for her, and I am thankful for Olive Crest for all the ways they supported me and provided me as I moved from home to home. So here I am today, grateful, standing before you as a 16-year-old junior from Chirico Hills High School. I am normal, but my story is not. And yes, I am a little crazy. I definitely talk too much, and I ask too many questions. And I may get a little hyper from time to time. But I have grown to understand over time that even though there are hard things in my story, I know I am loved. God has been with me even when I didn't know he was. I know he loves me. I know he will never leave me. And I know he will never let me down, because he hasn't yet. He led me to where I am today, and I am so grateful. And with him, I know I can overcome whatever happens after 16. Stay
here for a second. Do me a favor, stay standing.
Oh.
Sorry. Ella, you closed your story by sharing about how you were grateful. And I just want you to know how grateful we are for you, for sharing your story. I know that took a lot of courage for you to get up here. I know you've spent a couple days at camp, like your thoughts and emotions were disrupted during camp because you've been kind of nervous and anxious about this moment. And I just want to say thank you, because I know that God is using your story to change hearts and lives and expose a lot of us who don't know anything about the foster care system in Orange County or even in our nation or even globally. And he's using you to awaken some of us to what is really going on in our own backyard. And I'm so grateful for you. So thank you for doing that. And we would just love to pray for you guys. Will you guys reach out a hand towards Ella and let's pray for her? God, we thank you for Ella Ann Edwards. We thank you that you have led her to this moment. God, that every step in her journey, you were right beside her. Even when she didn't know who you were, when she didn't know you were there, God, you never left her. You knew this day was coming. You knew this moment was coming. God, we know you have big plans for Ella and for every single one of us. So thank you. Thank you for being faithful. Thank you for all the times that you used Julie to rescue her. Thank you for the Edwards family who have taken her in and made her their forever parents and siblings. God, thank you for the friends and the life group leaders and all of the people that have come alongside Ella and shown her your love and your acceptance. Thank you for your family that she talked about that has become her family. Thank you for her willingness to share her story. We love you and we love her so much. And just like she said, we're just so grateful. It's in your name we pray, and everyone said, amen. Thanks. So, when we hear something like that, what do we do about it? When you hear a story of a kid who's had to experience a bunch of stuff that none of us would wish upon anybody, what do? And if you're anything like me, what I often did was I would sit in a room like this in junior high or in high school or even in college or even as a young adult, and I'd be like, God, I'm 16. I can't take in a foster kid. I'm still a kid myself. Like, what do you expect from me? And so what I want to do is kind of turn the page for a moment. And I've asked Katie Edwards, our junior high pastor at the Lake Forest campus, and Ella's mom, to come and join me. And we're just going to talk a little bit about what does the foster care system in Orange County look like, and what can we do about it. So will you guys welcome Katie Edwards? Hey.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good.
Well, let me give you a moment to kind of gather yourself. I want to read you guys just a few statistics specifically about Orange County. I know that not all of us are from here, but the majority of us are. But here's just a few things. There are nearly 1 million children in Orange County. 1 million children in Orange County. Orange County, just our Orange County, is bigger than 21 of the United States. There are 21 states in the United States that are smaller than Orange County in population. In 2018, so just last year, there were 2,190 children that were placed in out-of-home care, so the foster care system. There were 2,861 children who were dependents of the court, meaning at some point they had interacted with our court system for a variety of things, and the courts were kind of looking out for these kids. They may have even gone home with birth parents, but there were still some concerns of some varying levels of degree, and the court system was involved in kind of their welfare of how they were doing. Right now, this is literally as of 2 days ago, there are 93 kids at Orangewood, which is the Orange County kind of take-in facility. So if a kid needs to be pulled out of a home, Orangewood for Orange County is where they go. And right now, there are 93 kids at Orangewood. 19 of them are under the age of 5. 55% of them are siblings. So that's what we're talking about. This story is at times a little bit overwhelming. It can feel a little bit defeating, like, man, what are we supposed to do about all this? And so that's what I would love to just talk to Katie a little bit about, because she's had a lot more experience with this than I have, and that many of us have had, and I'd love for her to just share a little bit about that with us. So Katie, first question for you is this. How did you and your husband, Ron, even become involved in the foster care system?
Yeah, so it's not actually something we ever thought about. It's not like we dreamed of fostering kids when we got married. We had a 5-year-old at the time. Her name was Abby, our daughter Abby, and she came to us and said she was lonely and that we should give her a sibling. And so, not wanting to go about that the normal way, we checked into adoption and thought about adopting internationally because we had been to Africa a number of times, but that avenue didn't work out for us. And a friend of ours came to us and said, "Have you guys ever thought about adopting locally, about fostering to adopt. And we were like, no, we don't want to do that, because everything about the foster system, the stigma was that it was messy, that it was hard. It just felt like we just wanted to bring a kid home. We didn't want to go through any kind of craziness, which I know sounds kind of callous now, but we decided to go to a class to just hear about the foster system. So we didn't know anything about it, so before we said no, and we definitely felt God kind of nudging us and prompting us to go to this class. We went to a class where we heard a lot of those statistics, and where we heard really what was going on in our own neighborhood, that there were kids that needed a home in our own neighborhood. And we got in the car after that class, and we were quiet. We both looked at each other, and we were like, we have to do this. We have to do this. There's kids on our street, possibly, that need a home. And with the Lord's help, of course, we just realized that God was calling us to be obedient to something that we didn't know a whole lot about, but we knew there was a need. And so we just felt like we can't not try. We can't not try to bring kids in, love kids where they're at. So it really kind of started hesitantly, and we really didn't see ourselves going there, but God led us to that point, and he was like, you guys got to do this. And then we looked at each other and we were like, okay, we got to do this. So that's really how we started fostering kids and saying yes to that. We had 6 foster kids total, and we were able to adopt 2 of those, and the other 4 went home to their parents and reconciled, which was really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so obedience is why
great.
We started fostering, but once we got into it, we just realized, man, there's such a need here, and the need is just for kids to be loved, truly. That's the raw need.
Yeah. So with all of your involvement in the foster care, 6 kids, 4 who've gone home, 2 you've been able to adopt, lots of interactions with the foster care system and the courts and whatever. What are maybe some things that you can share with us that you guys have uncovered that might just help us get a better understanding of what the foster care system is like here in Orange County?
Yeah, I mean, I think the tough thing is it's a process in the courts, and that doesn't always make sense. The quest for justice doesn't always make sense. So it's just a long process. Kids are kind of stuck in that process for forever. You know, we have a son, his name is Cooper. He was our foster son, and it was 3 years before he was adoptable because of just all of the time that it takes. So kids are in this space way longer than they need to be, but that just is agonizing for them. It was agonizing for Ella to wait 14 months. She was an orphan. She had to wait 14 months for us to adopt her. And that was agonizing for a kid who wants a family so bad, who wants it to be official and to have a forever family. And with our kids that went home, it was agonizing for them because they were going to go home to their parents, to their house. And so that's kind of the tough thing, is that it's just a long time that kids have to be in this limbo space, whether they're going home to their birth parents or they're being adopted. And so just imagine being in a waiting room for a year or 2 or 3 as the grown-ups make decisions for you that you're not really a part of. That would be really frustrating. So you can imagine how kids respond in those situations. So of course there's some behavior issues. Of course there's depression. Of course there is some acting out on the part of the foster kids, which I think is kind of the stigma of the foster system, is that foster kids are bad. They're not. They're in this agonizing place, this agonizing waiting room, waiting for grown-ups to get their act together. So it's just a really, really tough space for them to be.
Which is why Ella asked a lot of questions. She's trying, can someone help me understand what's going on? And students, what I want you to know, having talked with Katie and Ron a lot about their journey, is, sometimes we make it sound like the court system needs to get their act together, but the court system's torn as well, right? Their goal is they want kids to be able to go home with mom and dad, with birth mom and dad, but they're trying to make sure that birth mom and dad have their act together so that kids aren't left alone or aren't being abused. And so there's just this tension all over the place.
And I think that's an important thing to understand, is Ron and I really believe that God's design for every kid is to be with the mom and dad that God chose for them. So when we sent kids, those 4 kids, back to their parents, that's another part of the foster system that I think people don't talk about, is there's birth parents in the same agonizing waiting room who are working super hard to get healthy so that they can parent their kids in a healthy way. So we didn't find ourselves only loving foster kids. We found ourselves coming alongside of teen moms, one who was in jail, who we visited in jail, to love her and bring the love of Jesus to her. Social workers who are overworked and tired, and so they let things slide sometimes. You're interacting with more than just the kids in the foster system. There's all these people to be a light to love, to be kind, who are in unkind circumstances. And so we believe that kids are really supposed to be with their parents. So we did everything we could to help bring families back together. That was our heart. But in the 2 cases that we adopted, it just wasn't possible for the family to come back together. And so we were willing to step in and say, yes, we will be mom and dad. We will be family to Ella and to Coop.
Yeah. You mentioned Abby came to you at one point, was like, I want some siblings. Like, you guys know how this works. Figure it out, right?
No pressure.
What were those conversations like? Because it clearly changes your family dynamics to suddenly add someone, especially not a baby.
Yes.
Right? Suddenly when there's an older sibling, what was that process like for you guys and for Abby?
Well, I think the cool thing, about Abby is she definitely loves people. That's kind of her nature. So she was actually a pretty easy kid to involve in the process. So even at 6 or 7 years old, when we brought in our first placement, we went to her and we sat down and we were like, what do you think? Here's the file. Here's what this kid has gone through. And so every time we were going to take in a placement, we just involved her in that process. And then as we adopted, we involved Ella in the process when we were bringing Coop into the home. And we brought in some kids with some pretty extreme circumstances. We brought in a baby who was 3 weeks old and addicted to meth. And that's hard to detox a baby off of meth, which meant our whole family woke up every night from at 1:30, 3:30, 5:30, because that's when she was going through withdrawals. So our whole family had to be on board and involved in bringing kids in because it was family. It wasn't just about us being parents to a kid. It was us rallying around each kid as a family. And so we all had to do it together. So Abby was part of the process, and her and my husband really couldn't be trusted because they would just say yes without even thinking about if we had beds or if we had anywhere to put them. They were like, yes. And that was probably the hardest thing for us, is there's so many kids in the system, we would get calls all the time. And probably the most agonizing part of the process for me was when I would picture a baby in Orangewood or an elementary school kid in Orangewood, and we didn't have a bed, or we couldn't take them in, or it wasn't the right time. We got a call in the middle of summer camp one time, and I'm like, I can't get there. So you just think about the kids who are sitting there, and you just pray that God raises up somebody to come and take them in. So it was all as a family, everything.
Yep. Cool. Okay, I want to turn the attention to all of us now. How do a room full of teenagers who maybe God's doing something, maybe he's stirring up their hearts and they're sitting there and thinking, I'm just 16, I'm 14, I'm 18, I don't have a ton of money, I don't have an extra bed in my room, my parents aren't going to be down with this. What could I possibly do? How have teenagers come alongside you guys during your journey? And what are maybe even some other ideas that you have of ways that teenagers could get involved in helping us love the kids in Orange County who so desperately just want to be loved?
Yeah. Let me just say, there are so many ways that you could be involved in loving kids. At the very core of what this is, it's loving God and being obedient to him and loving others. So it's as simple as loving others, coming alongside in the foster system. So I would say there's a few different ways that you can get involved. At our church, we have an orphan care and foster care ministry that you can get involved with. They throw picnics for foster families. They provide resources for foster families. And so there's actual events that you can get involved with and help just encourage foster families and foster kids. Some of you guys, if you like to babysit, could become certified babysitters for a foster family. If you meet a foster family or somebody who's bringing in foster kids, you could just connect with that mom or dad and say, can I just come over and play with your kids for an hour or two? That way the foster mom could take a shower or do something like that. That would be the most amazing gift you could give her. I mean, there were times where I had 4 kids in my home and one that was addicted to meth. So taking a shower and someone coming and playing with my kids while I did that was a huge ministry to me. I had a couple girls in my life group who cooked meals for us. Every once in a while, they left things on our doorstep for our foster kids. It was just an amazing thing to watch the teenagers in our lives just do all sorts of little things. You can donate clothes, shoes, anything that you have, not your terrible stuff, because foster kids get a lot of hand-me-downs. What would it be like for you to go into your closet and pick out the best stuff, your favorite jacket, the best shoes that you have, and donate that? Donate that to Orangewood, to the county. There are foster agencies all throughout Orange County that HSM can give you and point you to get involved with. At Christmas time, buying Christmas gifts for foster kids. Sometimes they don't even see their birth parents at Christmas time. So what would it be like to bless a foster family with some extra Christmas gifts for their foster kids and for their own kids as well? So there's all different things that you can do. There's financial things you can do. Some of you might go home from here and tell your parents to go to a class to hear about foster parenting because you know your family could do what we did. You know your parents could do what we did. And you could be Abby and go home and say, can you get me some siblings? I hear there's 93 kids at Orangewood. So some of you could go home and have that conversation with your parents and dive into being a foster family with them potentially. So as a teenager, there's all different ways that you can give generously. You can give of your time. You can give of your stuff. You can connect at Saddleback because our church cares about orphans. Our church cares about foster families. But anything you could do to encourage, to lift up. Remember, it's an agonizing journey for everyone involved. Birth parents, foster kids, birth kids. So any way that you could encourage would be huge.
I would just follow that up by saying, if maybe God's stirring something in you, you could not be at a better church in Orange County. Our church is partnering with Orangewood and partnering with the state and partnering with the foster care system, the court system. And our church is actually training social workers. That woman that Ella gave a little shout out to named Julie, we're now training those people because, like Katie said, they're so overwhelmed. There's so many kids and they're spread so thin that we're helping train up new ones, continue to train them because they're under-resourced. Our state is running out of money, and so we can't even provide for the people who are supposed to be providing for the kids adequately. And so our church is stepping in, and we're finding all sorts of avenues, ways that you can get involved, that your parents can get involved, ways that all of us can get involved so that we can, like Katie said, go back to the basics of what Jesus talked about when he walked this earth. See, when Jesus was walking this earth, all these people had become consumed with the laws, the rules, the make sure you do this and make sure you don't do that. Make sure you do this and make sure you don't do that. And Jesus finally said, gosh, stop worrying about all the rules. It's really simple. You need to love God first and foremost. And second, you just need to love other people. That's it. And so that's what our hope is this morning, is to just maybe open up our eyes and our hearts a little bit to what's happening in our own neighborhoods, like Katie said, and that we would begin to show some love to a group of people who receive very little. At the end of our time together this week, we do a little thing called Kingdom Worker cards. If you've been to camp before, you know what these are all about. If you haven't, let me just briefly tell you about them. It's an opportunity for you to take a next step, to kind of continue moving in your faith beyond just day 5 of camp. And we'll kind of give you more information about what these are all about, but there's these cards that are in an envelope, and if you take one, you're committing to doing whatever is inside the envelope. And 50% of our Kingdom Worker cards this year are going to have to do with the foster care system. And so if right now maybe you're like, I got to do something. I can't listen to this and just ignore it. I can't let this go in one ear and out the other. God is stirring something inside of me. Make sure that when we present those Kingdom Worker cards, that you grab one of the foster care ones. They'll be identifiable as to which ones are foster care related and which ones aren't. But man, what a great way to begin to show our love towards God and towards other people by getting involved. Let's do this. I want to pray together. And then we're going to have just an opportunity to respond and sing a few songs and just give you some time to kind of sit with this information and process Maybe let God speak to you, maybe even give you a moment to speak back and talk to him. But will you pray with me? God, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for Ella. I thank you for Katie.